It is 10 a.m. here in Nairobi, East African time. A very good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're tuned in and watching us from. These are the latest news headlines from across the continent of Africa. My name is Miriam Ogotu. We start with the newspapers from Kenya. The Daily Nation. From one pain as schools defy state, some principals have ignored Ministry of Education's guidelines by turning schools into money-minting businesses, exploiting parents through exorbitant prices of items such as uniforms and imposing extra levies and other hidden charges. You'll find that on page 2 and 3 on the Daily Nation. Disaster: earthquake kills over 2,300 in Turkey and Syria. The most powerful earthquake to strike Turkey and Syria in nearly a century killed over 2,300 people. Yesterday, sparking frantic rescue efforts, it was felt as far as Greenland, and we shall look at that story just shortly. Raila's own goal on IEBC: we will not allow Ruto and his sycophants to single-handedly appoint IEBC commissioners. That story is on page 4 and 5 there. Inside the Daily Nation, the Standard newspaper. Raila's movement signals end of Azimio. Opposition leader Raila Odinga has formed a caucus called Movement for Defense of Democracy, which echoes his well-known political trick of dumping and forming new alliances after every election cycle. Will it gain currency like those before it? You'll find that story on page 6. Long wait for non-existent fertilizer. Government had told delighted farmers to pay 3,500 Kenyan shillings for a 50 kg bag of fertilizer, but almost 6 months later, the fertilizer is yet to reach them. You'll find that on page 8. How to deal with multiple pregnancies. Right, and Kenyans win round 1 battle with Facebook. That is on page 10. And then CEOs cut jobs on dim economic outlook. That is what we have. And of course, down there, tax wars escalate as MP orders Treasury for records. All right, you'll find that on page 4 and 5 on the Standard newspaper. The Star newspaper: how Uhuru Ruto was scuttled Qatar meeting. CS Mutua says it aborted because DRC was unavailable, says it's dealing with busybodies. The story is on page 4 and 5. Busy day as new Form 1 students join secondary school. That is the main pictorial there. Ministry of Health offer breast cancer services in all dispensaries. Every health facility right from the dispensary should be involved in the early detection of breast cancer. The health ministry has said cancer of the breast is the second most common cause of all cancer-related deaths in Kenya. That story is on page 2. Ruto troops want list of waivers since handshake. That is on page 7. And that is what we have on some of the leading newspapers from Kenya. The Daily News from Zimbabwe. Elections without talks will ruin Zimbabwe. That is according to Monzora, says after Chamisa writes to ED on similar issues. Okay. The Herald, also from Zimbabwe: cop arrested as anti-drugs fight escalates. UN heaps praise on Zimbabwe's HIV/AIDS strategy and no divisions in ruling top leadership. That is what we have on the front page of the Herald newspaper from Zimbabwe. The Punch from Nigeria: governors, parties begin legal battle over CBN deadline. El Rufai, Matawale, Yahaya, Bello sue federal government, demand extension. Court backs parties, stops the CBN, that is the Central Bank of Nigeria, Buhari from shifting deadline. EFCC nabs Abuja bank manager holding 29 million nairas new nodes. Okay, so that's what we have. And then we will hunt down 16 Nigerian killers in Burkina Faso. That is what President Buhari has said. Court stops Lagos International Airport concession. All right, that's interesting. I think I'll get more details later on that. Or Tom Shan's Atiku campaign IU slumps governors. That story is on page 8 inside the Punch. And also Lowman Supreme Court victory, daylight robbery. That is according to Machina Camp. All right, and also thugs disrupt Rivers APC rally, destroys vehicles. I guess, Nigeria is going to its elections this month on the 25th. And so there has been incidences of election violence, and that I think is just one of the examples there. The Nation, also from Nigeria, governors asks Supreme Court to hold the Central Bank of Nigeria's Naira swap deadline. And 3,500 killed in Turkey-Syrian earthquake. Katsina, Buhari seeks 2 million votes for Tinubu. And a trial of Ekwe Rimadu, wife-child doctor, begins. And education is the greatest weapon against poverty. That is a story inside there, and I wouldn't agree more. The Daily Monitor from Uganda: schools register low turn-up on first day. And parents and educationists who were interviewed by the Daily Monitor yesterday attributed the low turn-up to lack of school fees occasioned by hard economic times and the scraping of beginning of terms exams. The stories on page 6 and 7. All right, The Citizen from Tanzania: government asked to focus on IVF research and affordability. Stakeholders in the health sector have called upon the government to boost in vitro fertility IVF research in order to understand the scope of infertility challenges in Tanzania as the high number of patients and the cost becomes a concern. All right, banks engaged in mission to renovate and build embassies, and peace security talks to top EAC integration agenda. Very well. And then Tanzania, Morocco to finalize talks on fertilizer facility. The New Times from Rwanda: senators attribute school dropout to family conflicts, and rising riots in Goma hinder cross-border trade. And then Rwanda to tap into advanced Starlink high-speed internet. And I guess that's what we have in some of the newspapers from across the continent. I don't know whether I should bring you those ones from I think I'll just leave it there. I'll leave it there for this morning. So let's look at the latest as far as the weather is concerned, and some of the key major towns and cities across the continent of Africa. In Abidjan, it's a bit cloudy, I guess, standing at and also sunny at the same time, standing at 25 degrees Celsius. In Alexandria, in Egypt, 13 degrees, a bit of sunshine and some cloudy situation expected throughout the day. In Bujumbura, 22 degrees Celsius, a bit of cloudy and some sunshine there. Cape Town as well, standing at 23 degrees Celsius, and Dakar, at 18 degrees Celsius. Harare, they're enjoying the sunlight today, and 20 degrees Celsius. And in Nairobi as well, the same as Harare, at 20 degrees Celsius. It's all sunny. And in Johannesburg, a bit of some clouds expected, but also the weather there is quite good, 18 degrees Celsius. And in Casablanca, a bit of cloudy and some cold, standing at 6 degrees Celsius. So I guess a lot of cities and towns across the continent will be a good day to just, if you live near a beach somewhere, to just go and enjoy, because the weather seems very good, and the quality is excellent. The wind, especially in Nairobi, that is expected today about 6 kilometers per hour, and then we also have some wind gust. The air quality is ideal for most individuals, and you enjoy your normal outdoor activities. And it is a good day also for running, if you want to run, I think, especially in the morning and the evenings. And it is ideal for health activities. If you're a health enthusiast, you love walking, you love running, you love riding a bicycle, this will be a good day to do that. But I think about in the morning and evening, because during the day the heat can be a bit too much to some people there. So that is what we have there, according to the weather from most of the cities across the continent of Africa. Now, a bit of some sports news. I'm not a sports enthusiast, but I'd like to bring you up to date. Something that happened in line with the earthquake that happened yesterday in Turkey and the border between Turkey and Syria that has claimed a lot of lives, and our condolences with the people of Turkey and those from Syria that have been affected. And I think the rest of the world is offering help right now as rescue efforts continue. And Ghana international Christian Atsu has reportedly been trapped under rubble after the 7.8 magnitude earthquake hit Turkey and Syria. On Monday, the 31-year-old, who previously had spells with Newcastle United, Everton and Porto, has been playing for Hatayspor in the Turkish Super League since joining the club last September. Atsu was the hero for the Star of the South on Sunday, coming off the substitute bench to score the 97th minute goal in a 1-0 win over Kasımpaşa. That is the league in Turkey, so don't ask me what that is, okay? Now, Atsu was named player of the tournament when Ghana came second at the 2015 African Cup of Nations tournament in Equatorial Guinea. And according to officials, more than 1,000, right now I think it's over 2,300 people who have since been killed, and over 6,000 others have been injured in this disaster at the magnitude 7.5 aftershock struck Turkey's south hours after the regional quake. And according to reports, it was felt again in Syria and Iraqi Kurdistan. Other footballers and athletes have been affected by the upheaval after a massive aftershock with a magnitude 7.5 hit Turkey's south hours after that. And Hatayspor manager Volkan Demirel's wife, shared some tearful message, and other people across the world, of course. So we just hope that this Ghanaian international football star that was trapped in this earthquake is safe now, and other people, of course, that also have found themselves trapped in these very unfortunate conditions there. All right, so just looking back at the headlines that we have this morning, I've seen a UN report there that I'd like for us to pay attention to. But before I get to that, there's one story that I think we've gone through here in one of the newspapers in the country, and that is on the Daily Nation. From one, pain as schools defy state. Some principals have ignored Ministry of Education's guidelines by turning schools into money-minting businesses, exploiting parents through exorbitant prices of items such as uniforms and imposing extra levies and other hidden charges. This is a problem, and this is a problem because education has become very expensive because many parents, and after what we've had with COVID, a lot of parents were affected in terms of their incomes, others were laid off, other businesses were affected. So people are just starting to stabilize right now, and of course the school fees has been increased since the start of this term in most public schools. That was a government directive. So it's already very hard for parents to try to make it work. And so for these school heads, because this is where I'm having a problem, and I hope that the Ministry of Education can just do a little bit more. For the school heads to decide in public schools to run schools as they wish, I think that is unacceptable. If the government directive was the schools are not supposed to sell uniforms, your work is to teach and look at the welfare of the children while they are at school, then that is your work. The school uniforms and other things that these children require should be left to the shop owners, where they can go and buy these things at whatever price they want, according to where they feel their money, they'll spend it the best. So this business that public schools have started, of the school's management deciding that uniform will be sold at schools, and these uniforms are sold at a very exorbitant prices. I think this is unacceptable, and it is unacceptable. And this was a problem even in the other government, but we saw some of the measures that were taken to ensure that parents were cushioned. So my appeal will just go to the government. Parents are already going through a very tough time. And I was just watching some stories the other day where another public school, where the students who were transiting, the pupils who are transiting to early secondary school, to grade 7, I suppose, they're being asked to pay a lot of money, and yet the government have said that the directive from the government is that public schools should not be charging. This is just a continuation. So the reason why these heads of schools decide to run these schools as if it is their own private enterprise, that is something that I don't understand. These are government schools, these are public schools, so every head of school, every teacher, every principal should be following the directive from the Ministry of Education. And if you feel that you want to run school the way you want to run it and charge however much you want to charge, go start your school or go work in a private school. You know, private schools can charge us however much they want or do whatever they want according to, of course, the guidelines, but they charge however much. So parents will take their children in private schools according to how much their pockets can allow them and how much they can spend. But the public education, this is where majority of the children from this country get to have their education. So if this becomes unaffordable, we are creating a problem. And this is something that I hope that the government and the Ministry of Education can really take a very hard stand on, because parents already are suffering. So if these public schools that are meant to be affordable to majority of the children of this country now becomes expensive, and this is where parents now get exploited, this is unacceptable. So any head of a school, any principal that is found to be violating this, should be an action should be taken against them. But so hopefully the government is watching and something will be done in line with that. Okay, so that's what I wanted us to talk about, and then move to this report by the United Nations. This report by the United Nations, a new UN report had suggested the most common factor driving people to join extremist groups in sub-Saharan Africa is not religion, but the need for work. The report by the UN Development Program surveyed thousands of people in 8 African countries, including Mali, Nigeria, and Somalia. Only 17% of respondents said that religion was the reason for joining radical groups, whereas 40% said poverty was their main motivation. Education is also important, with one extra year of education significantly reducing a person's likelihood of joining an extremist group. And in 2021, nearly half deaths attributed to terrorist groups took place in sub-Saharan Africa. This report, I find it to be quite interesting, because a lot of times, these extremist groups, a lot of them, as we have been made to believe, that they are, of course, the founders of these groups, they majorly based on religious grounds, or it is their way of understanding what their religious persuasion is saying, and why they normally feel it's important to fight for that kind of belief, to protect it, and even to want to advance it, like we've seen with Al-Shabaab, with Boko Haram. And now we even have these Christian extremist groups that we've seen moving up, especially in the Western countries, where we've had groups that are really intolerant. We do have Christian extremists, and we do also have, when you go to a country like Israel, the Jews, the ultra-Orthodox Jews, they're quite extreme in how in their belief system. So there are extremism in all kinds of religions. I know when we look at that, we normally think of the Islamist extremist groups, but also we do have extremist groups from different persuasions and religions across the world. Now, this report says that, because we know, like I've said, Al-Shabaab and especially these terrorist groups, normally one of the key driving factors is religion, but apparently it's not. 17% of the respondents say that the religion was the reason for joining. So only 17% of these people who perhaps have joined these extremist groups, they're saying only, it's because of religion. But majority of them, which forms 40%, said poverty was the main motivation. Okay, poverty was the main motivation, and this is what we've been talking about here every time we look at the extremist and extremism activities across the continent of Africa. When you talk about the issue of marginalization, when you look at the issue of inequality that has run across the continent, those are the key factors. So the UN report that was carried out by the United Nations Development Programme surveyed thousands of people in 8 African countries, including countries that have experienced these activities, intense activities, where extremist groups are based, like in Mali, Nigeria, and Somalia. And 40% is poverty. 40% is poverty. And I guess with that, we'll have to look at the issue of a high level of unemployment. In sub-Saharan Africa is where we have a population of more young people than any other continent around the world. And a lot of these young people don't have proper places where they go and have their own, get employment. And just to piggyback on this report, I think there was a report the same by the UNDP of 1994. If I don't remember the entire report, just forgive me, but it's the first time, because they're looking at security. And this report, the UNDP report of 1994, helped in defining and shifting the focus of security as it were known then. Because then, security only meant that the state is secure from external aggression, the state is secure, and the interest of a state was secure. So that was the focus on security. That is how the security was defined until that point. So there was a report that was presented to the United Nations Development Program in 1994 that changed and shifted attention to how also security should be looked at. And this report that was presented said that, outside of just ensuring that the state is secure, there are other factors that must also be considered for a country to really, or for the international system, or for the world, for the global sphere to consider itself secure. So outside of just considering, the state security from external aggression and things like that, this report that was presented, the Human Development Report, that was presented in 1994, sought to influence the UN's 1995 World Summit on Social Development in Copenhagen, and the UNDP's 1994 Human Development Report's definition of human security argues that the scope of global security should be expanded to include threats in specifically 7 areas. I told you before then, security was only the traditional security as was known, and traditional security just has to do with the state of security of a country and not so much other aspects. But this report said there are things like economic security that should be included, and economic security requires an assured basic income for individuals, like we have seen now this report that was presented yesterday, and also for the global system to be secure, or for a country to be secure. Then we have to have a food food security to be addressed, and this requires that all people at all times have both physical and economic access to basic food. And also on top of that, there should be health security, and this aims to guarantee a minimum protection from diseases and healthy lifestyles, and it just continues. And also environmental security, which aims to protect people from the short and long-term ravages of nature, man-made threats like we're seeing right now, and deterioration of the natural environment, and that is where the issues to do with climate change and now the earthquake that we were talking about that happened and things like that. And also this personal security, this aims to protect people from physical violence, all right, whether from the state or external states, like now what we're seeing in South Sudan, in the DRC and other areas that are prone to conflicts. Personal security is very, very important. And community security, protect people from the loss of traditional relationships and values and from sectarian and ethnic violence. And also lastly, political security. This is concerned with whether people live in a society that honors their basic human rights. And we can have a debate on that until at the end of this. But I just needed to touch on that because this is the report that I was just reading to you that was presented by the United Nations, saying that one of the driving factors of terrorism in Africa is poverty. And when you look at that and that report that I just read, that I've just shared, the United Nations Development Programs report that was presented on the human security in 1994, it has everything to do. If you can tackle all of that, then I think you can tackle the issue of poverty. Why is this extremist activities not rampant in Western countries, in some countries in the Middle East, where they have assured their people of these things, right? Why? Because there is political security, there are personal security that is assured. We have food security, we have health security, we have economic security. So for us to ensure that everyone is safe and we don't have our young people exposed in this regard, and because of lack of these very important tenets as far as human security is concerned, you find that our young people become very vulnerable. So when these extremist groups come in, and there are people who don't have all these important things that they should be having and feel secure in the country that they're living, and then there's these other people who are coming with an option of, we can make it better. The government is the reason why you cannot be economic secure. The government and its policies is the reason why you're sleeping hungry at night. The government and its policies is the reason why you're unemployed or you can't have access to proper healthcare system. Then it's easier to speak into their mind and to speak into their vulnerability and to have them join these extremist groups. And that has really gone ahead to fuel to be a motivating factor of some of these young people wanting to join these extremist groups. Something else that I also found to be interesting, that education is also important, with one extra year of education significantly reducing a person's likelihood of joining an extremist group. Now, this is interesting because when you look at a country like Nigeria, because we know extremist activities are rampant, especially in the north. When you look at a country like Kenya, we know a lot of our young people, but now I think it's spread, but we know the northern part of our country is a bit more vulnerable. And other areas, so when you look at the areas even dotted out across Africa where these extremism activities are, you will notice that even the enrollment of these children to school or young people to school is not as much, is a bit lower compared with the rest of the country. And because in Nigeria, for instance, in areas in northern Nigeria, one of the key things is because a majority of the young people there, they have not gone through the education system compared with the other parts of Nigeria. So education is key, and they're saying, according to this report, that an extra year of education can reduce a person's likelihood of joining an extremist group, because education sort of opens your eyes and opens your scope of understanding and opens your you know, how you comprehend matters. And it shows you that as much as the government policies or the government in place might not be doing its best in addressing some of these issues, but it helps you understand that perhaps, you know, if you wait for another electioneering period, we can perhaps bring in a new government that maybe can offer us hope, and if that fails, then maybe we can another electioneering period, we can have a chance to you know, elect. Or also, you know, there are other ways you can agitate for your voice and for your issues to be heard without necessarily wanting to join an extremist group and fight. All I'm saying is education helps you see things differently and opens up your mind, and you're able to comprehend matters differently and look at things differently. So according to this report, the more someone is educated and goes up further with their education, the likelihood that they will not join these extremist groups. I think education is very important, and that's why these extremist groups have been fighting the education. Remember, they have three things that they, among other factors, but three things that really drives this belief and the jihadist activities and the extremist activities that we see. And these, they don't want the Western education, okay? They don't want the Western kind of democracy. And they don't want, and they want a state that is, if at all that this is Islamic jihadist groups, and they want a state that is an Islamist state based on very extreme Sharia laws, but they don't want anything Western, because they consider the education as we know it not good, and it's haram, I guess. You know, so that is what they fight, and that's why you'll see in areas where their activities are rampant, you'll find that there are no proper schools. They'd rather teach, they have their own schools where they teach however they want to teach, but to some large extent, you see what is happening now in Afghanistan. All girls, they don't go to school now. So girls get educated up to the age of 12. And then that's it. And even for the males, I don't know if they're allowed to go through the whole Western education system, but I guess there's how they teach, and I just don't get it. But they've said no. So education is a key thing that they fight. That is because, and you'll see in areas where they are, like I've said, education there is a bit poor, and they fight the educational institutions, they fight it, and they make sure they destroy schools. And so you'll find that those areas, they have the people are not very educated. So I think that is something that the governments, now that we have this report on areas, especially across Africa, that has these activities, I think that will be a good chance to ensure that the governments perhaps do something in terms of making sure that we have education accessible to the communities that live in these areas that are prone to these extremist activities. Make sure that we have enough schools, we have enough staffs, we have enough so that these young people, because you've seen according to the report, the more they're educated, the less likelihood that they will join these jihadist activities or these extremist activities. And like I said, it's not just the jihadist activities. We also do have other extreme religious activities, extreme groups in other different religions. I've mentioned here the ultra-Orthodox, the Jews ultra-Orthodox religious members in Israel. When you look at, they don't even go to the usual schools, actually, by the way. They have their own schools, and the men's work is just to read Torah, to recite Torah, and then the women, I think they get educated to some certain level. They're also very extreme in their belief system, and they're the ones you'll find having troubles. They are the West Bank and fighting this other side, because they just believe their views and how they see the world, that is the right thing, and everybody else will just go to hell, and they're just not not holy, or whatever it is the belief system is built on. Okay, so they're also very extreme. They're also very extreme compared to the other moderate Jews that you'll see protesting in Tel Aviv. They're protesting against some of the policies that the current Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was introducing, that they were feeling were quite extreme, and you'll find them protesting. But the ultra-Orthodox Jews, they support them. And that's why when he brought in a few members from that sect, they actually considered a sect, to the government with these extreme views, it was a concern to the moderate Jews and to the liberal Jews, who are the majority in the rest of the country. It was a problem because these groups of people, they are extreme in their views, and they're extremes especially in even finding lasting peace between Israel and Palestine. They take very extreme views and opinions on that matter. So it is spread all over, and it's not just an Islam thing, or and when you go to Europe and US right now, we have extreme Christian groups there. But they're saying the more people are educated, the better they're able to look at things, and the more they're coming from a place of understanding and a place of an informed position. And so it's easier for them to look at things without attaching religion, without attaching the Western democracy, without attaching all these other factors, but they're able to look at things differently and judge for themselves. So I think this report will be important for our leadership in this continent, to ensure that we have more of our young people educated. We have more of our young people have access to education. And I think that's why access to education and affordable education is very important across the continent of Africa. And that was one of the key things that our forefathers had. One of the dreams they had is to remove foolishness, and this was through education, ignorance, to address the issue of ignorance, because a lot of these young people come from a place of not having the knowledge. They're ignorant of some of these issues, and that's why it's easier. So if you can address the issue of ignorance by ensuring that our young people are educated and they have the information and they're empowered with information, then maybe we can halfway address the issue of these extremist groups across the continent of Africa. The other thing is inequality, all right? They're saying poverty, 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 poverty. And 40% said it's poverty that is the main motivating factor. When you go to a country like Mozambique, and I know we've talked about the northern province in Cabo Delgado, and the inequalities that have happened there, and the level of poverty that is in that country. Actually, in Cameroon, it is one of the most poor areas, and yet it is one of the most areas that is rich in natural resources. So because of inequalities, because of these multinational companies have come and take up their space, then their lands, and they're doing these businesses and they're benefiting, and then you'll find that these communities around that area, they don't get to benefit. They're seeing you taking away their wealth out of the country, and it's going to benefit maybe a few in the government and different countries, but the indigenous people from this area do not get to benefit. So you're already creating a situation where there is some level of discontentment, and this is a very fertile ground for these young people to feel attracted to joining an extremist group. And true to that, we've seen some people taking advantage of that and supporting some uprising, supporting the local Al-Shabaab in that area in Cabo Delgado, and this has become a problem. So I think the issue of poverty now has become a security concern. Poverty has become a security concern as life becomes more difficult and more harder, and a lot of young people having no ways of making things work out for them. So they will resort to joining these groups, because there's nothing as dangerous as a hopeless person. A person without hope, That's a very dangerous person. A person who feels they have nothing to lose. That is the most dangerous person that you can you can work with, or you can convince otherwise. So we need to ensure that we address the issue of poverty. The issue of poverty, and as we have seen, 40% of these correspondents said it is poverty. That is their main motivation to joining this extremist group. So I think that is something that should be looked at, and this UN report could be a good pointer, and perhaps help our governments in policy making when they're addressing some of these things, because I know the issue of poverty and unemployment is just one of the things that a lot of our governments in the continent are grappling with. So this could be a good pointer, and perhaps will help in our governments prioritizing issues in regards to addressing some of these things, to ensure that we are able to address these issues properly in the continent. So I'm hoping that this report will be helpful. Yes, I'm being interrupted. I'm hoping this report will be helpful to our governments in different countries here in the continent. Okay, so anyway, that is what I wanted for us to look at this morning. So hopefully, yeah. So the issue of I think we've looked at that earthquake from that happened, so I will not want to touch on that very much. And so, all right, so we saw the Pope Francis, the recent trip that he made. We have a few minutes, and I'd like for us to just touch on it. And he went. He had, in DRC and South Sudan, and he went and he was reflecting on his visit. And I was just talking to you about this yesterday, and I'm a bit skeptical whether his visit will make any difference, but I'm hoping it does. So the Pope Francis ended on Sunday his 6-day trip to Africa with a plea for an end to conflict in South Sudan. In a bid to spur the process along, Francis was joined on an ecumenical peace mission by the Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, and the moderator of the Church of Scotland, the Right Reverend Ian Greenshields. The Christian leaders' aim was to push Kir and Machar to commit themselves to the 2018 deal. Speaking to reporters as he flew back to Vatican together with the head of the Anglican Communion and a top Presbyterian minister, the pontiff gave an unprecedented joint airborne news conference. Francis celebrated the resilience of the South Sudanese women as he bet the country's transformation on them. So I'll just quote what the Pope is said to have said during that trip back to Rome. The women I have seen in South Sudan bring up their kids. Sometimes they remain alone, but they have the strength to push a country forward. The women are great. They are the ones that are moving things forward. The men go to the fight, go to war, and these women with 2, 3, 4, 5 children go forward. I saw them in South Sudan. On the first leg of his African trip, Francis was in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and he celebrated Mass before thousands of Catholic Christians, met with authorities, spoke to the youth, and invited Congolese to forgive those who committed inhumane violence against them. Yeah, so he was saying, I think he reiterated the position of the women. And we know a lot of times when you have these conflicts, I know also the men suffer, but women and children are the ones who bear the brunt of wars and conflicts in the different countries that you've seen. And when you see these women, carrying children on their back and staff on their head. And as Pope has rightly said it, because sometimes the men have gone out and they're the ones who are being involved in these fightings. And that's why, when people are looking at security, just going back to the security and what I was just talking to you about, the human security and the United Nations Development Programme's report on this security, and the one that was presented to it in 1994 that sought to look at security differently. There are also the aspect of feminism when it comes to looking at security and the contribution of women when it comes to security in the world, okay? Because a lot of times, and we were having this debate one time. Remember when the Democratic Republic of Congo President Felix Tshisekedi urged the young people of the country to volunteer to join these armed groups and go fight against the M23. And what we saw is young men. So the debate we were having at a certain forum was, can you imagine if we have had in this young men, also we had some young women who had volunteered to go and fight this M23, if we had had women, young women, 20, 21 years old, 19 years old, that would have raised a lot of debate across the world. So sometimes women's voice, I don't know at what point does it need to apply when it comes to security, but I think it's very important. It's very important, and the place that the women find themselves when a conflict is happening. So the feminists, when they argue that the women's voice are important, but also that women should be more involved. I don't know if they want the women to be involved in more of these combat activities, but I think because of how we are and our nature, I think it will be important for us to be involved more, especially in these mediation processes. I think that is a place that we should have more women come in and play, and take part and try to see how can we help. We saw during the 2007-2008 post-election violence in the country, and the position by former First Lady of South Africa, Graça Machel, her presence there was quite something, and we're told that she used her influence, and as a woman she brought in a different perspective that was able to have these antagonizing men on the table listen to each other, because she was able to come from the perspective of, hey, I was in these places and I've seen the suffering, and she was able to just bring that a bit moderate part and her perspective and view of what had happened. So it was easier for her and others like Kofi Annan, but especially her, to be listened to. So I'm just saying we should have more of women in these peace missions, in these negotiation processes. I see even these ones in the East Africa or IGAD or others, I just see men take a very prominent position. So we're just saying if perhaps we had more women in this peace building, we have peace building, we have peacekeeping, all these activities that are geared towards finding peace. If we had more women involved, maybe we'll see a different thing, because men can be very hot-headed sometimes, and this is my position and that's it. But for us, sometimes we are able to just bring peace. It is our nature. It's arguable, but I think it is our nature. So we do need more voices of women in these platforms to address the issue of security and its different faces. I think it's very, very important so that we have a representation. And so Pop was saying, I met with the women of South Sudan, and how they bring up their children. You'll find that they have even up to 5 children. Perhaps the husband died in the fields fighting, or they're out there fighting, or whatever reason it is that they might not be fully present there. But they're doing what they can. They're doing what they can to take care of their families, to take care of their children, and to take care of themselves, despite the very harsh conditions that they find themselves in because of this perennial conflict in South Sudan. And that is just one of the key things that the Pope mentioned. So he slammed once again the colonialist mentality that has prevailed for centuries. So Pope was just recalling and recapping his visit on his way to Rome. And he said, we have to get rid of the idea that Africa is to be exploited. Africa has its own life, and when he was in Congo, and the Congo is at a very high level. Speaking of exploitation, I have been really struck by the pain and the problems in the East, where there's a problem of war and exploitation. So I guess, Pope was just reflecting on his trip to the Democratic Republic of Congo and to South Sudan. So hopefully his visit will bring some change, and I think we'll just find time and go through some of these issues that were raised during the Pope's visit in these two countries, and perhaps how his view and the sentiments and the positions that he took, maybe how that will tilt anything. I highly doubt, but maybe just adding his voice there and just highlighting some of these things, might cause some actions to happen, or might cause. And yesterday we were having this conversation, is it yesterday or on Sunday? And I think it's Dr. Masanga who said that the Pope was addressing the wrong audience when he was castigating the West. And I tend to take that position. As much as he was here castigating the West, I think he should have a meeting with the West. He should have a meeting with the West and tell France, what are you doing? The US, what are you doing? Britain, and these are the countries that have interest in Africa. What are you doing? And why do you continue to fuel these conflicts in Africa? I think he should be talking to them, and he should be calling them out. Pope Francis, you should have a meeting with this the West leaders, and just tell them off on their faces. Maybe that will change things, because when you speak it here in Africa, they really don't care that much. They will still continue with the activities in DRC, with the activities in Central African Republic, with the activities in Mozambique, with the activities in Mali, in Burkina Faso, in Chad, and other countries that they have ensured that they are fueling this conflict for their own benefit. So maybe if you spoke to them and call them and just speak to them and tell them, stop, enough is enough, maybe they will hear you and they will have some shame. I doubt, but perhaps, it will be a challenge for them. So he said, he was very categorical, and he said Africa is not to be exploited, Africa has a life on its own, which should be respected, and her people should be respected. Yes, but as much as that is, I guess until Africa decides to respect herself and just understand her value and treat herself well, then this exploitation will continue, because we have leaders who really don't care, and the interest of the people of this continent is not their priority, and that's why we see the continued exploitation even after the colonialist came. At what point do we stop blaming the colonialist? Because I know, Pope Francis is saying the Western countries should stop having this colonialist mentality. But the reason why this colonialist mentality has continued is because we have allowed it in this continent. If we stop and say we will no longer allow this to happen, because we have the power. We are sovereign countries, are we not? We are independent countries. So at what point do we stop now blaming the colonialist and decide, okay, these are our countries, we have the mandate and we have the power, so now we can make the decision of chartering a different path for our countries and for our people. And it stops here, and now we are able to start a new path. At what point? Because we can blame the colonialists, and we have every right to do that, for setting Africa to the path that we find ourselves today, the disunity, the poverty, and all those things. But also, we've had independence now for many years. So when do we put a stop to that? And when are we going to be responsible for our own decisions, responsible for our own chartering our country's future forward? When are we going to be responsible? Because I, at one point I agree with what he's saying, but also I feel like that has been a line that has been used with a lot of our leadership in the continent to escape responsibility. Because as long as we keep blaming the colonialists and what they did, which we can't minimize. We know the effects are still being felt today. So we escape responsibility. No one will ask us about the corruption. No one will ask us about the bad economic mismanagement. No one will ask us about why are we not solving the issue of unemployment and poverty? Why are we not ensuring our people are fed? Like, this was the goal of our founding fathers. Many, many years later, we are still talking about poverty. We are still talking about education and ignorance. We are still talking about a health, affordable health systems in our countries, and majority of the African countries, we cannot even realize this. So where have we gone wrong? Did we deviate from that path? What are we doing that is not working for us, and what can we do differently? It's easier to blame other people, because then you don't take responsibility, you abscond responsibility. But you're able to say enough is enough, the colonialists were here, this is what they did, and this is the impact. But this is where we are right now. But from today moving forward, how can we do things differently? How can we change this narrative? How can we change our path? How can we improve on the lives of our people? How can we work on our health system so that we don't have to have our people go to India when they're looking for certain treatments, when we have all these hospitals in this continent that are not properly staffed, don't have proper equipment? How can we address that? How can we make sure our people don't go to bed hungry at night when we have 2/3 of the world's most arable land that is uncultivated? Two-thirds of the world's arable land that is not cultivated, but we're still dying of hunger. So how can we improve on these conditions? By using what we have and just serving our people. I think only then can we break off these chains that we find ourselves being locked in. Others, I think we've enjoyed being there for a long time, so we don't want to put the work in to make sure that things are different. Instead, it's easier for us to blame the colonialists, because that is escapism. They get to be blamed, but we get to not do anything about it, but continue with corruption, continue with poor governance, continue with bad human rights abuses, continue all these bad things that we see in this continent. So I agree with Pope. These Western countries should stop with their colonial master's mentality and treat us as equal, but they can't do that because we don't present ourselves as equals when we walk around with this huge begging bowl all the time, and we can't take care of even the most minimal things of our countries. If we are independent truly, then we have to act as so, and we have to take our own matters in our own hands, and that way we can boldly go to the world and demand for certain things, and the world will listen. But until we present ourselves in a certain way, then I guess we will continue the way things have been. Things have changed, but largely things still remain the same. Thank you so much for your time this morning, about 3 minutes to 11 a.m. Don't go too far. Another show will be coming on top of the hour. My name is Miriam Agutu. Thank you for watching. Bye-bye.